In a world overrun with the fake, delusional, and disingenuous, he stands as a beacon of truth. He is Abuki Cabal. You are listening to Abuki Cabal.
Welcome to the Abuki Cabal Show.
How's it going, everybody? Want to thank everybody for all the comments. Give me some pretty good suggestions. I think I got some from folks who weren't necessarily trying to be positive, but wound up being positive anyway. And I thank you anyway. Tonight I want to cover an article that I found on NPR talking about COVID brain and some of the effects of what has been referred to as long COVID. And some of the symptoms that people are, or patients are continuing to suffer from even after they get over their initial infection with COVID. Some of those long COVID infections don't resolve fully. So we're going to dig into that a little bit, and hopefully this will clarify some of the findings that researchers have come upon, as well as clinicians and other healthcare providers. And hopefully this will be helpful to some of you in trying to understand our current dilemma that is COVID. So let's take a look here at the article. Okay. Says an article is by John Hamilton, and it's From Blood Clots to Infected Neurons, How COVID Threatens the Brain. Okay. As researchers learning that coronavirus can affect neurons and may cause lasting damage in some cases. Okay. Months after a bout with COVID-19, many people are still struggling with memory problems, mental fog, and mood changes. One reason is that the disease can cause long-term harm to the brain. A lot of people are suffering, says Jennifer Frontiera, a neurology professor at NYU Grossman School of Medicine. Frontiera led a study that found that more than 13% of hospitalized COVID-19 patients had developed a new neurological disorder soon after being infected. A follow-up study found that 6 months later, about half of the patients in that group who survived were still experiencing cognitive problems. The current catalog of COVID-related threats to the brain include bleeding, blood clots, inflammation, oxygen deprivation, and disruption of the protective blood-brain barrier. And there's new evidence in monkeys that the virus may also directly infect and kill certain brain cells. Studies of brain tissue suggest that COVID-related changes tend to be subtle rather than dramatic, says Gidi Serrano, director of the Laboratory of Neuropathology at Banner-Sun Health Research Institute. Even so, she says, anything that affects the brain, any minor insult, could be significant in cognition. Okay. Some of the latest insights into how COVID-19 affects the brain, have come from a team of scientists at California National Primate Research Center at UC Davis. When COVID-19 arrived in the U.S. in early 2020, the team set out to understand how SARS-CoV-2 virus was infecting the animals' lungs and body tissue, says John Morrison, a neurology professor who directs the research center. But Morrison subjected the virus suggested the virus. Yeah, that's a typo. Sorry about that, y'all. It's throwing me off. It says suspected, should be suggested. The virus might also be infecting an organ that hadn't yet received much attention. Early on, I said, let's take the brains, he says. So we have this collection of brains from these various experiments, and we've just started to look at them. One early result of that research has granted a lot of interest among scientists. It's very clear in our monkey model that neurons are infected, says Morrison, who presented some of the research at the Society of Neuroscience meeting in November. Neurons are the brain cells that make thinking possible. But studies of human brains have produced conflicting evidence on whether these cells are being affected by the virus. The monkey brains offer an opportunity to learn more because they come from a close relative of humans and are easier to study, and scientists know precisely how and when each animal brain was infected. The monkey model isn't perfect, though. For example, COVID-19 tends to produce milder symptoms in these animals than in people. Even so, Morrison says, scientists are likely to find infected human neurons if they look close enough. We're looking at individual neurons at very high resolution, he says, so we can see evidence of infection. The infection was especially widespread in older monkeys with diabetes, he says, suggesting that the animals share some important COVID-19 risk factors with people. In the monkeys, the infection appeared to start with the neurons connected to the nose. But Morrison says that within a week, the virus had spread to other areas in the brain. This is where you get into some of the neurologic symptoms that we see in humans, he says. Symptoms such as cognitive impairment, brain fog, memory issues, and changes in mood. I suspect that the virus is in the regions that mediate those behaviors. I don't know if you guys remember, but if you remember how Chris Cuomo acted, before, if you look at some of his interviews and some of his shows before he was infected with COVID, and then you look at his behavior afterwards, he was, it was off. I had another person, tell me, it was another nurse, we were talking about it. And we were talking about how different, he was acting. And he was only one of the people that we were observing who acted differently after they had a COVID infection. If you go back and you look at, how he was, before, he seemed like he was more, more jovial, a lot more a happier guy. And after that, it seemed like when he came back, it seemed like he was irritated more easily. He just didn't, his whole affect was off. He just looked off, but if you guys go back and you take a look at that, you'll see, and I've had some patients also who have, even back, early 2020, when they were saying that, you couldn't get it twice and all these things, that, that was a time when we really just didn't know much about the virus. But at that time, I already had a patient who had been infected twice. So some of the things that were being reported weren't necessarily what we were seeing. So a lot of these these cognitive symptoms, and even during the infection, people weren't really thinking right. We kind of associated that with with fevers a little bit. It was kind of hard to tell where some of that was coming from. But then afterwards, taking care of people after the fact, after they got over it, you could tell that something was kind of off. So this paper, written a year later, year and a half later maybe, it seems to point to some of the same things that we were observing early on. And I wanted to say also that I know that when some of the first people who had succumbed to the virus had passed, I know that tissue samples were being taken. I know that autopsies were being done, and I know that some other things were done to try to find out what was actually going on with all of these viruses. So because we were losing, people were dying so quickly initially. It says that early 2020, but I think that there's some evidence that has come out from some of those samples that some of the first cases of COVID were in 2019. I saw an article, actually a paper that was done on that, on some of the samples that were being taken. And I know a person, whose wife passed, and she was relatively young. And at that time, she died of what they said was pneumonia, but, pneumonia doesn't, usually happen in young people. That's an odd kind of thing to see in young folks. And she had just come from a cruise, and passed kind of quickly. At that same time, I don't know if you guys remember, also back in early 20s, they were talking about this mysterious vaping virus. Not virus, but vaping condition. That was taking out all of these young folks. Well, that kind of died off. I haven't heard anything else about that. And I'm beginning to, all of these respiratory issues were happening during that time, and they were associating it with other things. And it now, is starting to look like that was probably, the early, infections of COVID that were occurring that, we really just didn't get on top of until around, December, January of around January of 2020. But it looks like it was here probably a couple of months before that. From the paper that I read, I'll see if I can kind of dig that up for you guys too. Okay, let's get back to the article here. Okay, diabetes in monkeys. Say in the monkeys, the infection appeared to start with the neurons in the quick. We did all that. Okay. All right. Okay, we'll go back to, this is where you get into some of the neurological symptoms that we see in humans. He says symptoms such as cognitive impairment, brain fog, memory issues, and changes in mood. I suspect that the virus is in the regions that mediate those behaviors. Okay. All right. That hasn't been confirmed in people, but other researchers have found evidence that the virus can infect human brain cells. A draft of a study, and it's linked there, for 20 people who died of COVID-19 found that 4 contain genetic material indicating infection in at least one of the 16 areas studied. And similar to monkeys, the virus seemed to have entered through the nose, says Serrano, the study's lead author. There's a nerve that is located right on the top of your nose that is called the olfactory bulb, she says. That provides the potential route for the virus to get from the respiratory system to the brain, she says. Serrano says the virus appears able to infect and kill nerve cells in the olfactory bulb, which may explain why many COVID patients lose their sense of smell. Some never regain it. Okay. In other brain areas, though, the team found less evidence of infection. That could mean that the virus is acting in other ways to injure these areas of the brain. For example, studies show that the virus can infect the cells that line blood vessels, including those that travel through the brain. So when the immune system goes after those infected cells, it could inadvertently kill nearby neurons and cause neurological problems, Serrano says. COVID-19 can also damage the brain by causing blood clots or bleeding that results in a stroke. Okay. It can damage the protected cells that create what's known as the blood-brain barrier, allowing entry to harmful substances, including viruses, and the disease can impair a person's lungs so severely that their brain is no longer getting enough oxygen. All bad. These indicate indirect effects appear to be a much bigger problem than any direct infection of neurons, Frontera says. People have seen the virus inside of brain tissue, she says. However, the viral particles in the brain tissue are not next to where there's an injury or damage, she says. Frontera suspects that because the virus is a bystander that doesn't have much effect on the brain cells, but other scientists say the virus may be cleared from the brain areas after it has caused lasting damage. Researchers agree that regardless of the mechanism, COVID-19 presents a serious threat to the brain. All the more reason not to get it. Frontera was part of a team that studied levels of toxic substances associated with Alzheimer's and other brain diseases in older COVID-19 patients who were hospitalized. The levels were really high, higher than what we see in patients that have Alzheimer's disease, Frontera says, indicating a very severe level of brain injury that's happening at that time. It's not clear how long the levels remain high, Frontera says, but she, like many researchers, is concerned that COVID-19 may be causing brain injuries that increase the risk of developing Alzheimer's later in life. Even COVID-19 patients who experience severe neurological problems tend to improve over time, Frontera says, citing unpublished research that measured mental function 6 and 12 months after a hospital stay. Patients did have improvement in their cognitive scores, which is really encouraging, she says, but half of the patients in one study still weren't back to normal after a year. So scientists need to speed up our processes to offer some kind of therapeutics for these people, Frontera says. Also, it's probably important to treat that person early in the disease than when the disease has advanced so much that it has created damage that cannot be reversed, Serrano says. All of the researchers mentioned that the best way to prevent COVID-related brain damage is to get vaccinated. Okay. Yet another group of researchers, basically telling you guys, and everybody, people are constantly saying that, people are still getting sick. People who got the vaccine are still getting sick. The vaccine is to mitigate the effects of the infection and not to prevent the infection. Okay. If in the event that you get it, after implementing measures to basically keep you from being infected, washing your hands, wearing masks that are rated for viral protection. N95 masks, not the blue ones, not cloth masks. If you wear the recommended protective equipment and take the recommended measures, washing your hands, social distancing, all of that, that lessens your likelihood of being infected. If in the event you still get infected and you are immunized, that means that the resulting infection will not be that bad. Okay? So that's the reason for getting getting the vaccination is so that, you can get over it faster, have less damage from it, and go back to a somewhat, normal functioning life after that. But as we're seeing, more and more research is indicating that, this thing is doing damage that we didn't even anticipate. And with each strain of this, it gains the ability to mutate and to affect different areas. So, I don't know how else to say it other than to keep saying it exactly the same. And that's, I realize that people are afraid to be vaccinated. But like I said, the information is out there, and it doesn't take a whole lot for you to find the good information. All you have to do is read. People saying that, it's a 99%, rate of recovery from the disease. Yeah. But, here again, today, yesterday I told you guys about, over 7,000 cases here in my state. Okay. There's another 7,800 and some odd people. So that's that's 15,000 people in 2 days. Okay. And that 1%, what's 1% of a million? You're counting that 1% like it's 1% of a small number. That's 1% of a huge number. Okay. So, anything that you can do to prevent getting this and spreading this to other people, you should do it. You got people out here making crazy mistakes. One person, they're even looking at, what they're going to do about a person who basically knew they were infected and went around an old person and basically that person died. So effectively, they killed that person, because like the post that I read yesterday, you have people who just are listening to people. You shouldn't do this. I wouldn't do that. And it's based off of misinformation. That's exactly what it is. So, I won't ramble on. I'll move on, to the next one. And hope you guys enjoyed this. Like always, it's been fun. If you guys like what I'm doing, please let me know in the comments. If you have any questions about this article or anything that you want me to cover, I'd be glad to. You can also put that in the comments as well. And, we can dialogue. I appreciate that also. Like I said, you guys, in your comments point me in directions that sometimes I haven't even anticipated, and sorry about my fumbling on my reading here. These glasses I don't think are good enough, and I think I need to get some glare. Anti-glare, I mean. So, like I said, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, and, as always, it's fun. Let me know what you guys think. Like, share, and subscribe. If you want to share it with other people. And like I said, let's all just, try to learn and get through this together.
You are listening to Abuki Cabal. the analytical savage.
I feel like a motherless child alone.